Hello, this is Outlaw Bookseller, this is Reading List Rock, and before we begin to look at Hawkwind again, here is a word from our sponsor. They are handing out the weapons, and your armor's ready too. But the most important item has been left up to you. You must make a firm decision, for once it's made you'll find that the role that you have chosen will entirely fill your mind. For the mask you have selected stands for chaos or for law, and you cannot take it off now till you're no longer in the world. Hi, this is Stephen E. Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller, science fiction writer, science fiction critic, general culture vulture, and I'm back with another Hawkwind video. And first of all, thanks to everybody in the Hawkwind community on a couple of Hawkwind Facebook pages, including the official one and the related album history one, for supporting me and giving me some great feedback on what I've done so far. I want to dedicate this video to my friend Farhan, who's been a really solid online mate of mine. We've never met. We connected through some reviews I wrote of Hawkwind on a certain website 10-15 years ago, the same sort of website that actually got me connected with Joe Banks as well, the author of Hawkwind Days of the Underground. So today, as you've seen from the scary preamble, we're going to talk about Choose Your Masques. This is going to be quite a long video because I've actually got a lot to say about Choose Your Masques. To sum up, for me, it's probably the best 80s album, and I consider it the last completely essential Hawkwind album. I am very, very much a 70s apologist. I've got all Hawkwind's material, you know, up until the sort of early sort of 21st century, I should say. So, you know, I do have quite a big sort of collection, and I'm familiar with lots of the material. The more recent material, I will admit, I'm less familiar with. So I do need to do some catching up because I haven't seen the band live for about 10 years. I don't really go to gigs anymore for sort of health reasons and things like that. But there is quite a lot to say about Choose Your Masques, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I would have worn a Choose Your Masques t-shirt today, but can you get one? No, they're very sought after and they cost the earth on eBay if somebody's selling one. So I thought I'd wear the Chaos badge, which I've had for ages and ages. I think I bought that about 85. So there's a little sort of, you know, dotting the I there and the old Space Ritual t-shirt. But there is quite a lot to say about Choose Your Masques. So, of course, Choose Your Masques came out in 1983. And when we think about 1983, what was 1983 like? Well, there were the miners' strikes, Thatcherism was a big thing. There was quite a lot of social unrest, and Britain was changing. And did Choose Your Masques reflect that in any way? Well, I would say yes and no, because of course, Choose Your Masques is very, very firmly a science fiction record. And of course, science fiction very often does reflect the society around it, but through a glass darkly and in a metaphoric way. So let's sort of talk about that a bit. And when I first heard Choose Your Masques, the thing which immediately struck me, first of all, were the sort of radical synthesizer effects on the album. And of course, they were done to a 4-piece, and Nick Turner guested a little bit. But there were some really radical synth effects. And listen to it now, that whooshing sound on the title track and the sort of zipping tachyon backward in time type effects on Arrival in Utopia. They're really quite impressive. So when I think of the early 80s, I think of digital synths, and I think of people like Richard Barbieri from Japan, later of Porcupine Tree. There's some really wonderful, subtle synth programming with digital synths, and Eno was doing that as well. But Hawkwind stuck very sort of firmly in these sort of like bizarre noises thing, which to me is the fundamental use of the synthesizer and what characterizes the synthesizer as an instrument. And, you know, there's some fantastic examples of that on Masques. And another thing that struck me as well was Hugh Lloyd Langton's songwriting contributions, which are simply simply fantastic. I mean, he was really cooking then as a songwriter, and you know, sort of major works, things like Solitary Mind Games, Waiting for Tomorrow, and a couple of years later when he wrote the wonderful Dreaming City and Moonglum, which appeared on Live Chronicles but not on Chronicle of the Black Sword, which is a shame because they're fantastic songs. Dragons and Fables as well, from the Earth Ritual preview EP, was a fantastic one from him. So, you know, he was doing some great stuff. There were also samples on the album from different sources, radio and TV sources, and I'll discuss those in detail later. So that was kind of an uncommon thing then. So Hawkwind again were ahead of their time with that. And I've mentioned Nick Turner. He appears very briefly playing sax. I think it's a bit of sax at the end of Void City. He's not credited on some CD versions, but I always like it when Nick was present because he added something to the band. It was great to see him live with them in that period. I know a lot of people are not keen on Nick. There tends to be a bit of a sort of two camps about that. I personally think he's incredibly charismatic performer, and I love his crazy musicianship and his attitude. To me, he's a great guy and an essential part of Hawkwind. So yeah, so to move on, Choose Your Masques came after Sonic Attack, and here's a little Japanese, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have got these HQ ones. They're really nice, aren't they? It's an album I really, really like. I think we tend to remember it in some ways as including the re-recorded version of Silver Machine, which a lot of us are not keen on, and I would agree I fall into that camp. The Sonic Attack had been the album I think of as Hawkwind's synth metal album. You know, there's a lot of sort of synths on it. There's some socially conscious lyrics, but they're quite sort of straightforward. And Sonic Attack for me was the weakest album Hawkwind had done to that time. This was a real return to form, and I thought this was a much, much stronger record. So I just want to talk about it as a science fiction classic, because there's a lot of material in it, and it's a record which bears revisiting, because the more you look at it, the more you listen to it, the more you discover there really is a heck of a lot of stuff going on with this sort of album. There really, really is. So just to sort of look at it in a bit more depth, obviously it's got this fantastic cover art which we know and love, and this is the sort of double blue vinyl issue I think from a few years ago. It is blue? No, it's clear, isn't it? I can never remember what colour things are. So that's a clear one, and it's got that wonderful cowled figure and the masks. And of course, there's quite a bit of input on this album from Michael Moorcock. Now, Michael Moorcock's lyrics on here come on the title track and on Arrival in Utopia, and they were credited at the time to Linda Steele, who was Moorcock's partner and still is. Now, prior to this, she had worked as a secretary for the American science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, and she was his sort of secretary, Girl Friday, sort of keeping Harlan under control, because he was quite a wild guy. And Mike went to stay with Harlan in LA in the early 80s, because he was writing a screenplay for film. I mentioned this in one of my Moorcock videos, and he wrote this book. This is all letters that Mike wrote to J.G. Ballard, sent them back to Ballard back in England. Ballard, of course, wrote High Rise. There's a Hawkwind song of that title, which isn't really anything to do with the Ballard book, but you know, it is a tie. And when I first met Mike in '88, he signed this for me, and this little dedication in there on the front free end paper. And I also got Linda to sign it, so you can see it's Linda Moorcock. She signed it as well because they got married, and I got her to sign her as well because she's mentioned in this. And of course, as I say, the lyrics were credited to her. Now, I'm not sure why. It could have been tax reasons. It's a bit like that thing with Silver Machine, where you've got early pressings. It's Calvert McManus, which is Brock's original wife, who sadly is no longer with us. And you know, it's one of those things where it was a way maybe of getting around a royalty problem with the record company, so it was done for that reason. So she's sort of important that way in the mythology of Choose Your Masques, I think. So that's Letters from Hollywood. It's the only edition there's ever been. It's great fun. If you can pick it up, if you ever see it, pick it up, because it's really hard to find. Never been a paperback edition, only been that one. It's illustrated throughout as well. Lovely book. So looking at the album in depth, I'm going to start with the title track, obviously the first place to start. And Choose Your Masques, of course, the lyrics are by Moorcock, and I did that recitation at the beginning. And it, of course, refers to a couple of specific things in sort of Moorcock's multiverse series. His entire works, his entire oeuvre are all linked together. and it describes the choosing of masks, and once you've chosen one, you will either be on the side of law or chaos, and that you cannot take the mask off until you're no longer in the war, and the war is going to go on for some time. And you know, that runs through all of Moorcock's books. And interestingly, of course, the album is called Choose Your Masques with a Q, and that refers to the sort of mask you wear at a masked ball, the sort of mask I wore in the intro, which really stems from sort of Venetian sort of things, Italian things. There's a thing in Italy called commedia dell'arte, which is sort of a traditional form of drama where there are set characters, Perio, Columbine, what have you, and they're sort of archetypal characters. And funnily enough, Moorcock references this quite a lot in his later Jerry Cornelius books, and he sees them as a kind of commedia dell'arte, a kind of sort of pantomime satire effect. And you can look it up on Wikipedia, read a bit more. I don't want to talk too much about it here because I want to move on with the record, but that's something that's referenced in Masks. And of course the actual song is called Choose Your Masques, and you know, you have those lyrics about selecting a mask and you know what sort of role you're going to play in the war between chaos and order. And you know, it's quite sort of a sort of foreboding and you know, uncompromising sort of statement. And I guess in British society then, we were looking at, to get the order we needed in society, of bringing some chaos in, because you know, Thatcher was doing some bad stuff. And this relates specifically to some other things in Moorcock's oeuvre. If you've read the Hawkmoon books, especially the first four, the tetralogy, the history of the rune staff, of course, Dorian Hawkmoon is Duke of Conn, he's German, and he ends up against the Grand Britannian Empire, a future empire of Great Britain, which is sort of evil, and everybody's wearing masks, and it's very, very strange. And there is a precursor to the Hawkmoon books called the Black Corridor. Rumours say that it was written mostly by Hilary Bailey, Moorcock's then wife, and the Black Corridor is a space journey where people go off, a family go up in a spaceship to escape Earth, and there are flashbacks when they're on Earth, and there's one part where people start wearing masks and they would eat in front of each other. So that's kind of a precursor of what happens in the future society of Hawkmoon and his world. So Great Britain, there's all sorts of contemporary references, because those books were written in the 70s. There's a ship called the Harold Wilson, which is Harold Wilson. So that's obviously a barbed comment about the sort of Labour politician there. So all that is in Hawkmoon. And of course, the masks thing, the Grand Bretons, they never take their masks off. They all wear different animal masks, and they're sort of like cultists. So it's a sort of weird, almost folk horror thing going on there. So Choose Your Masques kind of refers to that, and to this huge psychic war between law and chaos. And so that's a great opener, and those whooshing synthesizers and that pounding, Martin Green's pounding drums. It's really, really exciting stuff, and it sort of makes the sort of hair stand up on the back of your neck. And you know, whenever I play this, I always think it's fantastic. And I've mentioned before, I really love Dave Brock's voice, the timbre of it. It always seems so English and folky, and the contrast between the timbre of Dave's voice and the swirling psychedelia of the music, which is disorienting and strange and threatening. It's just wonderful. It's the past and the future meeting and becoming the same thing. So it works perfectly with the Moorcock's idea of the multiverse, of time meshing and falling apart, and that eternal cosmic balance between law and chaos. And that's all there, and we're only on the first track. So that's sort of great stuff, really. And moving on from that, we then go into Dreamworker, which is one of Harvey Bainbridge's songs, and I really like Dreamworker. It's got a strange atmosphere. There's the sample at the moment about the blue dreamer at the beginning, which suggests psychedelic drug. There's the sample from the BBC version of Lord of the Rings, where Ian Holm is one of the hobbits, and he's saying, "I choose not to do," and all that stuff. And so you know, that was quite innovative in things. But that's not my favourite version of Dreamworker. My favourite version of Dreamworker is the one on the Ipswich Gaumont video, which a lot of us bought on VHS at the time and then on DVD. It's the one with Turner taking it, and he plays a wonderful sax solo towards the end, sort of free jazz sax solo. And that for me is the definitive version. I really love that version. But you know, it's great stuff. And Harvey there was bringing a new sort of synth aesthetic to Hawkwind, using the sort of new instruments that are out there at the time. They'd had Tim Blake, who was a real maestro, so him and Dave took it on, and they sort of worked on it on Sonic Attack, but for me they did a better job on Choose Your Masques, more subtle, more varied, and they'd obviously got hold of the technology and sort of got more used to it and stuff, and were trying different things, which was good. So again, connecting to Moorcock, we then have Arrival in Utopia, which is just simply wonderful. Obviously, it's a thrusting, fast-moving track with lots of dynamics, and there's a great breakdown section in the middle where everything falls up from the drums and the synths, and it's just wonderful. And the lyrics, I mean, Moorcock's lyrics are just so good, you know, and you can tell he's a writer. That's the benefit of using a writer to write your songs. And the whole idea that if we had a perfect society, a utopia, we'd be bored mindless, which I think is, you know, a great way of looking at it. And of course, utopia literally means no place. There is no perfect society, and it was coined by Thomas More back in the sort of 15th century. And Thomas More, of course, was a philosopher and writer, and out of the word utopia comes dystopia, the bad place. And most science fiction, of course, is about dystopian societies, because as Moorcock points out in the lyrics of Arrival in Utopia, there's nothing left to fear. We're bored mindless. What do you do in a perfect society? So we kind of need that danger, and Hawkwind bring that in the song, and it's just such an exciting number, and everybody is really on it, I think, in that. The first side closes with Utopia, which is a short sketch, that repeated refrain of, if you want to get into it, you've got to get out of it. And of course, it seems to have a double meaning, the getting out of it meaning of, you know, being stoned, which would be no surprise to the sort of Hawkwind community. But there's also the thing about, if you think about, if you want to get into Utopia, you have to get out of it, because Arrival in Utopia has shown us that Utopia is boring and mindless, and pleasure all the time just isn't good for you. You know, you need a bit of adversity. So if you want to get into Utopia, you've got to get out of it. And I really like that message, and the repetition, the chant thing is, you know, obviously you could say it's just a filler, but it does have a serious message. I think that's really great. You know, it's fantastic stuff. So, you know, moving on to side 2, we sort of look at, I'm just going to pick up my original CD here, which I've kept because I really like it, because it's got the proper lettering on the spine, which the other ones don't have, and I've had this forever. And you know, you've just got to love this cover, haven't you? It's so great. I just love it. I could look at it for hours and hours and hours. It's so grim and strange, and it really sort of sums up the feelings of the record, which are very intense. And because it opens a Silver Machine, you know, you can see why they did it. 10th anniversary, big hit single, maybe bring some more money in, because let's face it, Hawkwind underground band, you know, they needed the money. It's a big light show, it's hard to keep going, but I've never particularly liked that version, so I'm going to move on more quickly. I do think it fits in the album, because the album is very SF dominated, and of course it's a Calvert song. It's about his bicycle, so it refers to Alfred Jarry, the proto-surrealist writer. So, you know, it's sort of literary stuff in there again. And then we have Void City, which again, you know, it's a little sort of drum machine-y type thing, little synths, and there's that little vocoder chant on there. And of course there's another sample, and it's the voiceover from the beginning of The Outer Limits, which was a 1960s science fiction show. Younger viewers may have never seen it. You can stream it on Amazon Prime, I think, and it's out there on DVD and Blu-ray. And Outer Limits was kind of a Monster of the Week show, and it ran for quite a few episodes, and I've got it here somewhere, and some of them still really stand up today, particularly episodes like Nightmare and the Zanti Misfits is really good, and they're mostly alien invasion stories, and they're well worth checking out. And I remember in the late 70s they showed them on TV, and they were all quite late, and I used to stay up to watch them, and you'd get the control voice telling you that, you know, there's nothing wrong with your TV, and that's the sample that's used in Void City. And Void City again maybe is a reference to arriving in Utopia, because if you are bored mindless, then, you know, void, without a mind, empty, what have you. So there is something there. So we're looking for entertainment, and, you know, and obviously the guys from Hawkwind found it in Outer Limits, as I did, and many of us did. Actually, on Outer Limits, if you're going to watch it, there's 2 episodes particularly which are really good. They're both written by Harlan Ellison, who I mentioned earlier, who Mike stayed with in LA while he was trying to write a screenplay, and where he met Linda, his wife. And they are called Demon with a Glass Hand and Soldier. if you mesh the two together, you basically get the Terminator. And Ellison sort of settled, I think, out of court with James Cameron and the makers of Terminator, because they pretty much took his plots and meshed them together. And Demon with the Glass Hand is also filmed in the building where J.F. Sebastian lives in Blade Runner. So that's a huge building that's full of water, and he goes up to see him, and then Roy Batty, the killer android played by Rutger Hauer, comes in. So that's in there as well. So there's sort of a connection to Blade Runner as well, funnily enough. So looking forward then, we get the first of Who's two songs. There's Solitary Mind Games, which there's a lot of harmonics on the guitar, and it's very introspective, and I just think that he was really writing some fantastic material then. And it was great because Dave, you're saying, I love Dave's voice, but the thing about Hawkwind I liked was that they were like another one of my favourite bands, the Stranglers. They didn't have a lead singer. Only when Calvert was there all the time did they have one lead singer. They had a number of singers: Brock, Turner, Calvert, Lemmy, and then later on you get, you know, people like Harvey Bainbridge, you get Hugh Lloyd Langton coming on, and he was really good, you know, and I really love that track. It's very, very introspective and quiet and gloomy, and you know, it's just great songwriting, really great songwriting. And speaking of great songwriting, what came up next then was another Calvert song, which the band had performed live years before, but never got around to recording with him. And that's Fahrenheit 451, which of course is based on the amazing dystopian novel by Ray Bradbury. And this is a fairly recent cloth-bound edition. I've got several copies of this, as I love it. And Ray Bradbury, I think most people know Ray Bradbury as he was really, really important science fiction, fantasy, horror, and even crime writer. Who started practicing in the 30s, and he died a few years ago. And a wonderful, wonderful man. He had a very pastoral, lyrical way of writing. And Fahrenheit 451, if you don't know, I'm sure you probably do, is about a future society where books are banned because they're full of ideas and they're dangerous. So probably in that society, music is banned as well. And this is a book that's written about 1950, and it's got things like wall-sized interactive TV in it. So it's ahead of its time. So despite the gentle lyrical pastoral feel, there's sort of real techie stuff in there as well. And Bradbury wrote a wonderful story, I think it's called The Commuter or The Walker, I can't think it's called. A guy goes for a walk in the future at night, and he just gets arrested by an unmanned police car, you know. So this ties in perfectly with, you know, the paranoia police who sussed out the potion. You know, Hawkins' concern about society and you know, and sort of control and things, and that balance between law and chaos that we need to have a civilized society and to enjoy our lives and to have some freedom. So that's all there as well. And yeah, and the song is great. You know, it talks about book burning, and it's very sort of fast and vivid, and it's got great lyrics from Bob again about sort of burning the Library of Congress. It's just scary stuff if you love literature and writing, to imagine that happening. And of course there's two film versions. There's a recent one which I'd rather not look at, and there's a great one from Truffaut from the 60s, which I watched last year for the first time in about 20 years, and it's fantastic. I must get out again. If you've never read this, do, because it's really great stuff. So that's Fahrenheit 451. So a classic SF theme there. So throughout the album you've got Moorcock, you've got Calvert, you've got Ray Bradbury, who's wonderful science fiction writing, and they're all the way through. Just to pick it up again, then you have the scan, which is a bit of a filler, but you know, when you've got that much drama, sometimes you need a bit of resolution. And the way the scan falls between Fahrenheit 451 and Waiting for Tomorrow, to me, is a bit like the way that you get things like the Forge of Vulcan on Quark Strangers and Charm. You know, it sort of takes you out, and it gets you immersed in the sound without the words. And you know, it's great stuff. And just to mention Moorcock once more before I go on to the closing track, something that he did a couple of years before that, he did some work with Blue Oyster Cult. I don't know if you've ever heard the songs he wrote for Blue Oyster Cult. Blue Oyster Cult, interesting band. They don't always do it for me. I think their early stuff's really great, but I'm always fascinated because they're very interesting song titles and very strange ideas. And that's because, again, they used writers to write their lyrics. Their lyrics were written by Patti Smith, by Moorcock, and you know, other people who were basically writers. You know, they very rarely wrote their own songs. Funnily enough, when they did, and they were Don't Be the Reaper, they had their biggest hit, even though it sounds like the Byrds more than their usual stuff. And something that Mike did, I think in 1981, for this Blue Oyster Cult album, which is entitled Fire of Unknown Origin, which is a Patti Smith song, because Patti Smith used to go up with Alan Lanier, who was Bach's keyboard player back in the 70s. And it's quite a more Moorcockian cover. The guys have masks on, as you see there, possibly tattoos. And some of them are actually masks, definitely. And this This has a song on it called Veteran of the Psychic Wars, which is really great, and it's got this wonderful melody, and it's written by Michael Moorcock with Donald Rosa Buckdama from Bach. And I picked this up a while ago in HMB, and it was I think it had some money off because there's some small flaw on the sleeve which I could barely see, and it's great. So if you've never listened to Blue Oyster Cult, I recommend that track, and I recommend their album Secret Treaties, which is really good record. Maybe I'll talk about them a bit more because they're a fascinating band, very strange. So there's another Moorcock's little sort of collection there, and the album ends with Waiting for Tomorrow. And this is the double one with lots of bonus tracks, which sort of basically sort of remixes and what have you. And Wait for Tomorrow, I think, is probably my favourite song by Who. It's incredibly foreboding and dark, and he talks about clouds forming into swords and the planet running out of steam. And it's really apocalyptic, and it does make me think about the climate crisis. And whenever I listen to it, it's sort of, it is a very doomy, sort of gloomy, downbeat ending, rather like Paradox on Hall of the Mountain Grill. And, you know, Hawkwind never shied away from that. And the thing I would say that characterises Choose Your Masques is that overall sense of a foreboding and cloudy and mysterious and dark. Even though things like The Void City have an uplifting sort of thing, it is a fairly sort of dark record, really. And I just think he was cooking so well on that. And whenever I listen to Waiting for Tomorrow, I think of a short story, a story called The Run, which is by a writer called Christopher Priest, who's a friend of mine, who is one of the sort of new wave science fiction writers who was, you know, published in things like New Worlds, which Moorcock used to edit in the 60s. And Mike and Chris didn't always sort of see eye to eye, and they have occasionally been critical of each other's work. I like both of them, and I've met Mike a few times. I have a closer relationship with Chris, as I know him much better. And The Run was Chris's first story, and it's set in a future society, and it's about a future president of Britain in his car, and the car's kind of run on rails, and he is called back from a meeting somewhere in the countryside to his sort of office to deal with a military emergency that's coming up, and he has to do like a chicken run, as in Death Trap, through a huge mass of unemployable rebels. And he's a political figure, and quite a conservative one is the way it's painted. And he sees some rockets taking off, and all the imagery in The Run, which was, I think, published in 1966, I think, really reminds me of Waiting for Tomorrow. So whenever I listen to Waiting for Tomorrow, I think of that story, and I really love that story. And it's very sort of powerful. And it's in a book called Real Time World 2, the revised edition of Real Time World, which is a trade paperback. It's a great story. If you like good SF, I would advise you to get it. And I actually wrote the blurb on the back of the book, funnily enough, for that one. And so Waiting for Tomorrow kind of finishes it off. And, you know, it's just a gloomy record. It's a dystopian record. So what more can we say about it? I think Choose Your Masques is an underrated classic. I think we should listen to it more. I think we should enjoy it more. Obviously, a lot of us already do. And the more I listen to it, the more I like it. It has grown and grown and grown in my estimation as a classic Hawkwind album. So I'm very interested to see what you think. Thanks for listening. Any more insights you've got, I'm really keen to hear, and I hope to be doing some more Hawkwind videos before too long. I'm planning one on 25 years on, and another one on Warrior Edge of Time, and there will be more beyond that. So this is Outlaw Bookseller. Thank you very much again to everybody in the Hawkwind community for supporting me by watching these videos. And if you haven't subscribed, please do, because that helps me maintain a focus on these things, because it is quite time consuming, and, you know, I do need your support, and I really value it. So remember, the battle will be long.